Today we will discuss on an important topic, the learning and memory. This learning and memory is a complex neuropsychological topic, and it involves a number of structures. Okay, so now before that, you know the gentleman sitting there. Somebody respond. Somebody open up.
Yes, sir.
Can you name?
Mahatma Gandhi ji.
Mahatma Gandhi. Why do you say he's Mahatma Gandhi?
We know that he is a freedom fighter.
He is the freedom fighter. Okay, that is one attribute. But how do you know? You have not seen. You have not seen him. How do you know that he is Mahatma?
By seeing posters.
Yes, you have studied, and you have studied about his biography and his achievements or his involvement in freedom fighting, and you associate himself with the freedom fighting. So now you have given two attributes for Mahatma Gandhi. One, he is a very well-known person, and there is no second opinion that he is none other than Mahatma Gandhi. So how you recalled this fact that this picture correlates with the great person, and you recalled it back, and that is stored in your memory. That is what I was trying to discuss in this topic today. That is learning and memory. You have learned through your primaries, secondaries, and other history and social sciences, and you have known about him, and also you have known about him outside the school teaching. Two aspects, and then you recalled that memory, and you told that he is Mahatma Gandhi, and also you told his work. So that means you have retrieved two informations or two or more informations regarding Mahatma Gandhi. So this is what the memory is. So that means it is a sort of a retrieving the stored memory. Now let us consider what is memory. Learning is a process by which we acquire knowledge or information around the world or about the world. That is the process. Learning is a process. The memory is the process by which the knowledge is encoded. That means whatever we have learned, encoded, stored, and retrieved as required. That is memory. So that means learning and memory, they go hand in hand. They cannot be separated. They are like two sides of a big coin. So you have to have a learning, and this learning is associated with the memory. So now if we are going back, what are the types of memory we know? We have one, what is called declarative memory, or also it is called explicit memory. So this memory is, we declare it, we try to express it. So that is the declarative memory. So then another memory is a non-declarative memory. That means the memory is you cannot express it out, but it is there inside. This is an implicit memory. So now we have a explicit memory and implicit memory. So now in the explicit memory or in the declarative memory, it is also known as a autobiographical memory. autobiographical memory. So that means what you have brought in today by retrieving the information about Mahatma Gandhi and telling about these things, it's an autobiographical memory. So that is one type of memory. It is also called autobiographical memory. Now, this explicit memory has two components. One, the concepts, the rules, the whatever the principles to follow, that is a semantic memory, remembering about the concepts or the rules or a grammatical things. So that is a semantic memory. That is a thinking about that type of memory. Another thing is an episodic memory. Episodic memory means you are trying to remember certain events in relation to time, space, and other factors. So say, for example, your birth date. So date you are born. So that is a sort of a episode you have remembered it. Or the day you have got admission in the college. That is also an event that has changed your life. So that is also episodic memory. Or the day you went back with the COVID-19. So the date also you remember. So that is this type of thing. Or the place associated. Suppose you have visited certain places of interest and you remember that place and then you tell that I have visited. That means that is again an episode. So that means time and space that constitutes of the episodic memory. So then these are two components of the explicit memory. So now we have an implicit memory. The implicit or non-declarative, or it cannot be expressed out, but it is there. So in this implicit memory, we have the procedural memory. The procedural memory means the skills, the whatever we try to learn, motor skills we have developed, like cycling, swimming, or playing games, or even tomorrow if you become a surgeon, the surgery, all those are implicit memories. So then we have another component, priming. So that means a sensitization or a sort of a clues. You take the clues and try to remember that. That is a priming component of the implicit memory. Then here in this, we have an associate learning or conditioning components come. Conditioning reflexes, they come. These are associative learning. So also in the implicit memory, of course, in the implicit memory and the explicit memory, we have a sensitization and habituation. I will consider each one of them one by one in a detailed manner. Now move on to this declarative or explicit memories. I have already mentioned one, semantic, about the concepts and facts, then episode, about the event. Here I have mentioned here this semantic, this thing is processed in the lateral and anterior temporal cortex, mostly in the hippocampus and some part of the amygdala things and the prefrontal cortex. So that is where it is processed. And the events are processed in the hippocampus, the medial temporal lobe, and the neocortex. So this is where it is processed. Now I have a figure here. So can anybody tell what is this I have shown? I have shown an animal there. Can anybody unmute and name? Yes, please.
Elephant, sir.
It is an elephant. Wonderful. So how we know about that it is an elephant? So that means it is a fact. So you have been taught about the elephant since the childhood. Even as a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, so this particular animal has already created an interest in us. And our mother or our brother or father have shown this picture, and he has shown that he's look here, this is elephant, this is elephant, this is elephant, and now you have formed the image, and this is the type, because you know that elephant has certain features like the trunk there, and the big ears, the thick legs, and a large body, and with that we can associate for this animal. So in the bottom, I have mentioned certain he does calculation. I have written he does calculation. Why we don't use he do calculation? Because this is grammatically inappropriate if I say that he do, because we have been taught in the grammar that the third person singular will have es suffix. So that means he does, or the whatever, he comes, he goes, something like that. So that is the rule. So that rule is a part of the semantic memory. That means we always sincerely follow. So that means each language. So I'm talking only about English. Each language have certain semantics, some grammatical issues, so that we will follow. So that so in case of Hindi, so the male gender having a different verb pattern and the female gender have a different verb pattern. So maybe a tha, thi, wo ladka tha, ladki thi, something like that. So these every language has that type of a grammatical one that comes as a semantic fact. Then I have written another here, 2 into 2 is equal to 4. So that means we have memorized during our childhood the tables. So you remember the tables, how hard we try to remember each of these tables of multiplication. So maybe up to 20 or up to 30. I don't know how many of you have gone up to 30. Up to 20, everybody has gone. So these tables are a part of the semantic memory. So that means you just recall. Whenever you have been asked to 10 20, you can easily say, or whatever. So now these are facts about the semantic memory. I said here on this side, I have shown episodic memory. I have shown an event here. Can anybody open up? What is this event? Please. What is this event? I have shown an event there.
India's Independence Day, sir.
It is the day of independence for India. It is the day of August 15th, 1947 is the day of independence for India. And if you closely see, there are colors associated. So now if I can recall these colors as a part of our national flag, isn't it? You can just see they are becoming a colors of our national flag if you try to remember. So like that, all these things, events, this is an event. 1947 is an event for any Indian. That is the day of independence. So that becomes encoded in us. Even we were not, or you were not born. Even I too was not born. But still then we feel that 1947 is something which has changed our life. So that is one, this is an episode or an event. So this is a broad range. So now concerning anything about me or about self, birthday or days of admissions, days of graduation, day of joining the job, or a day of visiting a particular place, or a interesting event, or watching a match. So all those things become the episode or the event. So now I have already mentioned this is processed in the prefrontal cortex and the temporal cortex and the lateral and interior temporal cortex. This is processed in the hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and the neocortex. Neocortex involves all the sensory modalities, the visual modalities. So now move on to the next component. We have a non-declarative memory. In the non-declarative memory, we have a procedural components. I mentioned there in the sense of procedural skills. I mentioned in the skill, the cycling or doing some acts or learning some skillful movements, and even trying to fix a screwdriver or trying to use some tools. So these are all part of the procedures because there are definite grammar associated, certain steps associated, or what we call as SOPs. So these steps we follow, and that is the procedural memory. That is a non-declarative. And the centers involved are the basal ganglia, the striatum, the caudate nucleus, and the lateral part of the cerebellum and the motor cortex. These are the places where this information is stored and this information is formed. Okay, that is about procedural memory. So then comes I will come about habits little later on. Habits means performing the same act because as a routine that becomes the habit. So you try to do certain things, that becomes a habit. Now I will talk about that thing in subsequent slides. Now priming and perceptual these things. There are a number of priming areas. Nowadays you people are more expert in priming. One thing here, I have just made this figure in the hand. What does it indicate? What this hand or the whatever I have projected, what does it indicate? Yes, we all use in your mobile use, you try to use this icon and then you say something to your friend. Come on, well done, isn't it? So this is priming. So that means you have not said anything, but we have understood that. Here I have used 3 letters, 3 alphabets I have used. Okay, so now you people, the current generation, you try to interpret. So can anybody tell about that? It is simply IOU. But if you are thinking in a grammatical sense, I owe something to you. So that means that is the interpretation. So that means these are all priming. These are priming letters. These are priming symbol. And here is another priming figure. Can you see that? What is this figure is about? So we reconstruct this figure as an elephant. So that means this is what is called a priming or perceptual memory. So that means we try to, and nowadays we are using many emojis, many of these languages, many of these expressions using hand, and these are all the priming part of the memory. That components of the implicit memory, they are processed in the neocortex. That is the visual cortex, and here not only visual cortex, the you have to think about the somatosensory cortex, IOU, that means visual, somatosensory, and something O means OWE, OU, something like that. So the multiple sensory components are involved. Now here we come back with the associative learning. That is a classical conditioning. The centers associated with are the amygdala, cerebellum, and neocortex. You cannot avoid the neocortex because the neocortex is important for the assimilation of the sensory information. Now if you see this thing, the bell and the dog and the salivation, these 3 components, the bell, the dog, and the salivation, Put them together, suddenly you remember Pavlov's experiments and Pavlov's classical conditioning experiments. This you immediately say that it is a Pavlov's dog, wherein this dog has been conditioned with the ringing of the bell and giving a meat and the salivary response. So this is the classical conditioning. This is associative learning. So then we have a non-associative learning, so like habituation and sensitization. Now I talk about the bottom one here. So now I will just mention an example. A baby, a newborn baby and a mother, they are there. And this newborn baby, when the baby cries, even mother is sleepy or sleeping deep, she wakes up. She is so sensitive to the cry of the baby, and she gets up and she feeds the baby, and that is what the maternal behavior is about. So sensitization. This is a sensitization. She may sleep deeply with other noise like her mother-in-law may be trying to call her and she may not respond to the mother-in-law, but baby's a frail cry may wake her up. That is what is called sensitization. Now I have brought here the rail engine. I talk about railways. In the railways, what happens? We have a sleeper class. In the sleeper class, we sleep. What happens when you go to the train, you try to sleep yourself, immediately you hear a very the noise is the noise of a moving vehicle is so much so that you are disturbed. But as the time passes, as the journey progresses, you will stop hearing that noise. So now you got adapted to that noise, and you don't hear that noise, and you have a casual conversation with your friend without any difficulty. So that means why that thing happened. In the initial stage, when the train was moving, it produced an enormous amount of noise. Suddenly you forgot about that and you are not bothering about that. So this is what is called a process of habituation. So now I mentioned about non-declarative memory. These are components of the non-declarative memory. The procedural, that is the skill development, then priming of the particular event, that are particular thing which we try to understand. Sometimes you see all that I love New York, or I love Bangalore, I love AMSR, whatever. The love, you don't write love, you just use that heart sign. So you say that. So like that, we use that. That is a priming language. So even if I write it in the R of the AMSR, if I reverse also, you will read it properly, AMSR, something like that. So these are something about non-declarative memory. Then we move on to the just a little bit explanations. I just have written these things just for your benefit when I post them for your this thing. Explicit memory is a factual knowledge about the people, places, and things. It has a semantic and episodic components, which I have explained. Explicit memories that are initially required for formation of the implicit memories. So that are initially required for activities such as riding a bicycle, and which eventually becomes an implicit memory. So that means start with it's an explicit memory, and then eventually it becomes a task which is implicit. Now, implicit memory, I have mentioned about all these things: priming, procedural memory, associative learning, and that conditioning. And in the conditioning, now I have added one more: operant conditioning. I will explain that in the slide when I discuss about this thing a little more. So non-associative habituation and sensitization. I explained about those two events: the train journey and the mother and a baby relation. Now, priming, I have already mentioned. I don't want to, this is the facilitation or recognition of words or objects prior exposing them. It is dependent upon the working of the neocortex. So here I just do IOU, ILU. So ILU, you know that wonderful song from a Bollywood, I love you. So that means icons are emojis which we are using in the communication through the mobile telephone. Now, procedural memory includes the skills and habits which once acquired become unconscious and automatic. They become reflexive. So if you have learned certain acts like cycling or swimming, so that means they will remain with you forever. Only thing that uh, when you have started, maybe your skills may be very high, and if you stop using, your skills remain, but again you have to practice and you will come back to the original or even better it. So this is processed in the basal ganglia and cerebellum. So now skills, I have mentioned cycling, walking, even walking is a skill, and climbing steps. All these things are skillful, or even playing a piano, or playing an instrument, or even making a drum, or all those things. So they are all skills you develop while you are growing. The habits, they perform actions in response to, say, just like habits means, I'm just trying to tell that when music is played, what happens, we all have a tendency to tap our hands or legs, tap the hands on fingers on the table according to the rhythm, or they tap the legs according to the beats. So that becomes automatic. That is a habit, and nobody can stop you, and you are tuned for that. Or waving of the hands. If somebody is singing and you like that, and you try to be associated with the song, or even going to the extent of dancing, or trying to sing with the singer. So like that, these are all habits. I did not mention about habits there. So these are the habits we developed. I have just given only few things, and these habits are a part of the learning when we start appreciating certain important facts. Associative learnings. In the associative learnings, we have a classical and operant conditioning. I will go a little bit further here. One learns about the relationship between one stimulus and another. Here, there is two stimuli. This type of memory is dependent on the amygdala, emotional responses of the cerebral, emotional responses, that is the cingulate gyrus, and the cerebellum for the motor responses. So now let me worry about the classical conditioning, the Pavlovian experiments. What Pavlov did, he conditioned the stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. What is conditioned stimulus? Is ringing of the bell. Unconditioned stimulus is presentation of the meat to the animal. So now whenever he was presenting the meat, he rang the bell. And when he gave the meat, there was a response because of the presence of food in the mouth. There is a salivation. That is an unconditioned response. Now he did it several times. Then several times the response was salivation. After some time, so in one fine day, he forgot about presenting the meat. That is an unconditioned stimulus. And he only rang the bell and he forgot. So then the dog was salivating. That is the discovery of Pavlov, and then that he made that this is a conditioning reflex, and he studied it extensively. That is what we know today. So now this conditioning, this is one of the classical conditioning of the Pavlovian, classical conditioning by Pavlovian experiments. Now here I am just using that. So when you present the dog with the meat, it salivates. That's the response. This is the unconditioned stimulus. And when you when you ring the bell, it does not salivate. So that is when the dog was not conditioned. But when you pair these two, that the ringing of the bell, then give the unconditioned response, the dog salivates. So you pair it several times. Then what happens? When you ring and you present the meat, there was a salivation. Then after some time, there is only bell, no meat, salivation. This is a conditioned response. So we are all having some conditioned responses. So if I try to remember you some food items, maybe you may start salivating, even I am so distant away from these things. So just trying to remind you of the tamarins or raw mangoes or any other food item, a very nice smell coming from the food, kitchen. So you will start salivating. That is a conditioned response. So now this is for conditioning response, a pairing of the conditioning stimulus and unconditioning stimulus is a must. And this has to be repeated sometimes so that to produce the response. And it requires the presence of the neocortex, not only the amygdala and other things, and neocortex. The entire ringing of the bell should be heard in the auditory cortex. From the auditory cortex, it should reach the somatosensory or whatever the association cortex. From the association cortex, it will come to the amygdala. From the amygdala, it will go to the cingulate gyrus. From the cingulate gyrus, it will go to the third cranial or whatever the salivary nucleus, the salivary nucleus, and then salivation. So that means so many paths. So many paths are happening. So that means all those things. And if you don't, for the same dog, if you start giving the meat without ringing the bell, after some times this becomes extinct. This particular conditioning response becomes extinct. That means it is a temporary arrangement, temporary thing. Now the dog understands that the ringing of the bell has no meaning. So that means, so to prevent the extinction of the conditioned response, you need to intermittently booster stimulus or or strengthen the stimulus. Intermittently, you have to pair them and show that. So this is what the conditioned response. Now we have another conditioned response. This is called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning means it is purposeful. That means to operate, the person has to perform certain actions to get reward or avoid punishment. Get reward or avoid punishment. So that means you have to operate or you have to perform certain actions. This is being done by Dr. Skinner's. These are classical Skinner's experiments. Here he paired the unconditioned response or unconditioned stimulus with the reward or punishment to perform a task. Rats are allowed to press the bar to get food pellets. Rats, one trained to keep the pressing bar, rats were subjected to electric shock to get the reward. So that means the complexity of the operant conditioning is increasing. I will show you in the next slide. After some repetitions, the ringing alone, or after some time, the whatever the electric shock alone will produce the response. So these are again involves the various neocortical areas. That means pain, the punishment, that is about the somatosensory aspect, and they will produce the response. Now we go further. The remaining part of the subsequent part of the conditioning is similar to the classical conditioning. Now this is one of the classical experiment done by the Skinner, wherein this is a mice or rat that is placed in a chamber. This is Skinner's box. This is called Skinner's box. So rats were placed in a controlled Skinner box which contained a responsive lever. This is a lever. So now once it presses, you get the food pellet here. You get the food pellet here. So now pushing the lever by the rat. So that means he first placed this rat, and now the rat was made to understand what is this all about. So learning. So now it when accidentally it pressed the foods, there was a pellet of food there. So that means it understood that a pressing of the food liver will give the pellet. Once after having been done, delivery of food in response to light. So that means he reinforced, he gave the light, red light and green light, and depending upon the type of the light, there was a delivery of the food. And this delivery, the light was given first. So then after giving the light, then the animal was asked to perform this liver pressing, then food was delivered. If the light, the pressing of the liver, and it is becoming more complex. It's becoming more complex here. So that pressing of the liver. So that means it has to understand, or it has to discriminate between the two colors of the light. Or that is the another important aspect. In the Skinner box, they produced a loud noise. To avoid the loud noise, the animal has to press the lever. If the animal presses the lever, the loud noise will disappear. That means that is or switch it off. So that means this is a negative reinforcement. The first one is a positive reinforcement. And another thing, activation of this floor is electrified. This is the electrified floor, and if electric current is passed, it will be jumping, and it came to know that by pressing the lever, that electric current will diminish. So this is again a negative outcome, that is a punishment. So to avoid punishment, so this will work. So now these are some of the trials done by Skinner, and these Skinner's experiments for the operant conditioning, they will be summarized here. So that means a positive reinforcement, a negative reinforcement, positive punishment, a negative punishment. So that is in order to understand the entire complexity of the learning process, how we try to learn a particular thing utilizing these particular experiment or particular models. So same thing happens to us, and we also perform, but there are no Skinner boxes there, and we are there in the God's own box, and we are trying to achieve. So now, but just I want to tell you, there are two aspects. Operant conditioning is the conditioning for a purpose, and conditioning for a purpose either to get reward or punishment. The classical conditioning is only to get particular reward only. Here there is a purpose. So that is what the operant conditioning is about. Now, to tell back about the operant conditioning, so we have the this beautiful story of Tenali Ramakrishna. Tenali Ramakrishna, he was the Krishna Devaraya asked him to give the cat that he should not drink milk or something like that. He presented the cat with a hot milk, very hot milk, and he paired it several times. At the end of the day, whenever the sight of even the milk, it was running away from the milk. So that was the classical storyline you have about Tenali Ramakrishna. Now move on to the next slide. So now here I just try to make the differences, and you read these differences here. I'm trying to talk about the operant classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and you try to remember, because I have already explained the detailed manner. Okay, just I will give you in this slide. Okay, the next we move on to just a break we will take regarding this. Here is the two rats. It's rather interesting phenomena. Every time I press this lever, the postgraduate student breathes a sigh of relief. The two rats trying to communicate each other. So that means the sigh of relief for the postgraduate student is his research work is about that Skinner's model, and trying to understand the rat behavior. So that is what. So now move on to the next slide there. Non-associative learnings. What are these non-associative learnings? Habituation and sensitization. Decreasing responsiveness when stimulus is repeated frequently. Example, I have already mentioned, in a train journey, the sound produced by the moving train keeps on decreasing as time passes, and finally you may sleep or not conscious about the sound. That is our day-to-day experience. Sensitization, increased responsiveness when the stimulus is repeated or recurs. Say, for example, painful stimulus, whenever you have during night, it will be becoming more and more severe. And even if you try to ignore also, you may not, and it will become. Or another example I quoted already, the baby crying and a mother's responsiveness. These are dependent on various reflex pathways. So now move on here. So now I am just trying to talk about this is how the people are sleeping in the train, and the first time it is applied novel and evokes a reaction, you become what is this noise is all about. However, it slows down, and you try to ignore and you be comfortable, and this is associated with the decreased release of neurotransmitter from the presynaptic terminal because of the decreased intracellular calcium level that is happening at the neocortical level. The decrease in intracellular calcium is due to the gradual inactivation of the calcium channels or calcium sequestration. It can be short term or can be prolonged if exposure to the benign stimulus is repeated in man. So that is about habituation. So this is one simple example. Maybe there are many other habituation examples that we think about. Now, about sensitization, what is happening? This will be reverse. Sensitization may occur as a transient response, and if it is reinforced additional pairings of a noxious stimulus, so now it will prolong. So now short-term prolongation of sensitization is due to calcium. There also it is calcium decrease, here calcium increase, and even activation of the second messenger system through the adenyl cyclase pathway. And there will be greater cyclic AMP production and these things. And this is called a long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation, which involves the protein synthesis and the growth of presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons and their connections. This is what about the sensitization. Now, here I'm just showing you the long-term potentiation. So these are classical experiments done with the hippocampal slices. And when the hippocampal slices are there, microelectrodes are placed, and they recorded by stimulating one side, and they recorded from the other side. I'm not going into the technical details of the hippocampal slice recording, but when you record, you have a potential like this. So that means usually this blue one is the potential. You can just see that the small increase in the small depolarization, small wave of depolarization, these blue dots. Okay, so this is the one axial potential, the blue dot there, blue line there. So now after stimulating, when repeated trains are given, so now what happened? So this becomes a red. Now these are represented as red dots. There is some amount of depolarization left with in the postsynaptic level, postsynaptic neuron. So this depolarization, so that means that this one is as a what is called a long-term potentiation. This is a long-term potentiation. This is attributed to the calcium and the cyclic AMP other mechanisms. So that is the opening of the channels, and that results in the greater amount of depolarization. So this is one of the long-term potentiation is one of the class usually asked short note question. Now we go back with the memory formation now. Memory formation requires certain rules or certain set of normalities. Now there is no single place wherein memory is stored. The memory is stored in multiple sites in the brain. We will come back. and the memory is not having a single representation or a single characteristics. Say for example, what? So now this particular pen, so this has certain qualities come with then visual input. So then comes the whatever the sound it may produce, the characteristics, and all other cues, all other sensory cues are processed. So like that, it has a multi-dimensional aspect of a particular object has a multi-dimensional aspects. So that means that is a second component. So there is no single place in which the memory is stored. That means it is stored in multiple places, and it is analyzed in terms of a different perspectives or attributes of a particular model. Third, both semantic and episodic knowledge are a result of four related distinct types of processing. So this distinct type of processing is one is encoding, consolidation, storage, and retrieval. So that means there is a processing is very distinct and requires these four methods. Now we look into this processing. The one is encoding. Encoding refers to the process by which newly learned information is attended and processed when it is first encountered. The extent and the nature of the encoding are critically important for determining how well the learned element will be stored or remembered. For memory to persist and remembered, the information be done or encoded thoroughly and deeply, and it has to be repeated several times. This is accomplished by attending the information associated meaningfully. That means attributing certain other characteristics. And then we try to encode it. So that means certain memory aspects we try to remember with mnemonics, or certain memory aspects we try to remember with emotions. Certain memory aspects we try to relate with some incidents. So like that, we try to store. So that is what the last point will tell. Systematically, knowledge that is already established, memory has to allow one to integrate with the new information already existing. Now, so this is one of the encoding of the episodic memories in the brain, and the right hemisphere, right side is the left hemisphere, that's the dominant hemisphere. The left side is the right hemisphere, is a non-dominant hemisphere. Yesterday I talked about that. You see that redness indicates the activity. So activity on the left prefrontal cortex. This is the prefrontal cortex. This is the cerebellum. This is occipital cortex. This is cerebellum because these two are reversed. This is cerebellum and frontal cortex. So activity of the left prefrontal cortex is associated with the encoding process. So when subject were scanned while attempting to memorize, the subject has been asked to memorize certain words, paired category labels like a country Denmark, metal, platinum, etc. So when he was trying to memorize these words, this is the activity happening here. So this is where the encoding is taking place, that is in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, just to have, this is one of the fMRI recording to understand how the encoding is taking place when we try to memorize. Now, the consolidation is trying to accumulate, trying to make it formed and then place it at one place. The consolidation refers to those processes that alter newly stored and still labile information, because some information is very labile and very transient, and that has to be consolidated and that has to be stored. So now that is the so that it can be stored for a long-term usage. The consolidation involves expression of genes and the synthesis of new proteins, giving rise to structural changes that store the memory over time. So that is what the consolidation is does. That means consolidation is associated with the expression of new proteins or new gene expressions, or the formation of a new dendrites, formation of the new synapses, what we call as a synaptic plasticity. The storage refers to the mechanism and the sites by which memory is retained over time. So it is stored at one place, and it should be available. The stacking, it should be available for retrieval. One of the remarkable features about a long-term storage is that it seems to have been an almost unlimited capacity in our brain. So as you advance from first year to final year, you accumulate so much information, still your brain could accommodate. But anyway, the brain prioritizes your storing capacity. Some of them were kept back, but still then they remember. So in contrast, short-term or working memory, they are staying for a very short period, and you will be forgotten about all that. Now, retrieval refers to the process that permits the recall and the use of the stored information. It involves the bringing of the different kinds of the information together that are stored separately in a different storage sites. So I will tell about the storage sites in the subsequent slides. The memory, such as a perception, it is a constructive process, therefore subject to distortion. Whenever you are trying to retrieve, sometimes it gets distorted. Sometimes it becomes maybe abstracted. The retrieval of the information is most effective when it occurs in the same context in which the information has been stored. So that means whatever the cues or whatever the things, whenever you are trying to learn, and that is the one, retrieval is also easier. Suppose if a particular topic has been taught by a particular teacher with a particular example, and if you try to remember that example, your retrieval will be faster. So that is how you must have experienced even in your all these years of learning. Retrieval, particularly of explicit memories, is critically dependent upon a short-term and working memory. So you know, short-term memory is different, and working memory is a prefrontal cortex. Short-term memory is a hippocampal things. Now, so regarding a retrieval of the episodic memory, so same experiment fMRI is done. This is the dominant brain. This is the non-dominant brain. So areas where brain active, when he's trying to remember or retrieve the information, when he tries to retrieve the information, so what is this thing? So here, list of category labels, examples that were not paired in the category. So when he tries to retrieve the information, you see that on the dominant hemisphere, you have only this part or this thing. But on the non-dominant hemisphere, this is a frontal. This is frontal. So say this is a cerebellum here. This is occipital, frontal, and some part of the posterior parietal. This is posterior parietal. This is angular. They are activated on the non-categorical or the non-dominant hemisphere. Whereas in the dominant hemisphere, you have only small activity here. This is the posterior parietal cortex. This is the occipital cortex, this is the posterior parietal cortex, and this is the angular cortex there. So these are the activities which when you try to, that means the activities are happening in the non-dominant hemisphere. That's what I wanted to. So that is somewhere near the frontal lobe. Now, stages of formation of the memory formation. Now I brief here. So there are three types of memory stages. One, sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, working memory. Sensory memory is for a very brief time, less than a second. Short-term memory is in minutes, less than a minute, or may sometimes extend up to hours. Long-term memory is for hours, days, and years together, months and years together. So sometimes it's lifelong. Certain memory we retain. The working memory and short-term memory are for the same duration. It is a working memory is only for a short duration. So during short-term memory, the memory traces are subject to disruption by trauma, various drugs, or the attention. Suppose if your attention is diverted, you do not have the short-term memory. So that means the long-term memory, whereas long-term memory traces remarkably resistant for disruption because they are not consolidated yet. Now, if you go further, so this is how the process of memory formation take place. So sensory memory is the sensory information. So somesthetic sensation, the visual sensation, auditory sensation, or any other olfactory sensation, all these sensory modalities, they have a memory. And this memory is very transient, less than a second, and that would create attention. So now that particular thing, because if I am smelling nice food item coming from the kitchen, so now I have that sensory information. Now when I see that smell along with the food item, now I know that that is a food item there and that is very tasty, that is of your liking. So now you come back here, that becomes a short-term memory so that you enjoy that particular dish. That becomes a short-term memory. So now this short-term memory, you try to remember about that. You try to remember about that, and you try to recall, and you tell your mother or the person who has prepared, and you tell that it is wonderful, it's nice, I enjoyed. So I already repeated 3 times. Like that, when you repeat this, the short-term memory becomes consolidated, and that would enter into a sort of intermediate stage, and from the intermediate stage it enters